Good morning. I want to do a video, another attempt, tried one already, about recent events. Charlie Kirk being killed, shot down at the University of Utah. Brutal, awful, horrific. He's 31 years old, a young man. And no, I am not where Charlie is politically, where Charlie was politically. My own, kind of political map has shifted and been upended and in some ways gotten more, I don't know if I want to say complex, but has shifted and altered over the years, become more open, I could say. Less ideologically driven, I think, I hope. More open to a conversation. So I'm not, I wasn't where Charlie Kirk politically. And so it's not really from that angle that there were things that I really admired and some things that I agreed with. I had watched clips of him over the years, and because Charlie himself was kind of a big-spirited person, big-hearted, big thinker, just a big spirit, had a big spirit. He engaged with people from many different walks of life, and because I've been interested in, culture and cultural discussions and politics in the U.S., you come across, there's an ecosystem. I don't know if I want to use that word, but there's certain figures and there's a lot of talking heads politically, a lot of people who are engaged, and but not an infinite amount, and you see familiar faces after a while. And Charlie was one of those people who did get out of his kind of ideological silo, seemed to delight in doing that. So I'd see him, pop up on interviews and podcasts and stuff with different people. And also would see and watch sometimes his debates that he'd have on college campuses. And he wasn't the innovator of that approach, but he definitely was one of the bigger names. And it was entertainment, on one level. Even though I don't align with everything he said, I do with some stuff probably. But it wasn't really from a political fascination or I wasn't looking for political resonance when I would watch him. It was just interesting to see how somebody debates and how they interact with people and how you come up against opposition and I would see grace come through when he would talk to people, and that he would, flag common ground, and he would show grace in conversations with people with opposing viewpoints, especially if somebody came in good faith. He seemed receptive to that and trying to have a sincere dialogue. And I respect that. I really respect that. It's great to see that it's not just two people talking past each other, trying to flamethrow each other. Now, he wasn't a perfect debater, better than I could do. However, it's not really something I'd want to do, to be fair. But there were times that I saw where he kind of just sidestepped a point or sidestepped a question, I don't know, because he felt cornered or realized somebody had made a good point, and he would kind of sidestep or deflect onto another point that he could make and make it strongly, but it didn't really directly address. So, I mean, yeah, he wasn't like a perfect. There were things that I didn't, sometimes felt like didn't appreciate or whatever. And he also had major commitments. I mean, he was running this major organization. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say he's probably one of, if not the, but definitely one of the reasons that Trump got elected. It was somewhat instrumental in the coming together of Bobby Kennedy and Trump. He had that event with the fireworks and Foo Fighters playing in the background. That was pretty amazing to watch, pretty awe-inspiring to watch, just the kind of spectacle of it. Bobby Kennedy joining Trump's team. And just how he, marshaled support, rallied support. That he just had a lot of different things that he was involved in. And in that sense, playing a major role in that election, you almost can't overstate the influence that Charlie Kirk had, just because that's world history changing right there. Anybody to be involved at that level in a presidential race, we're talking about world history. So not to mention just culturally, the ways that he was involved. And anyways, so he definitely had an outsized influence. But one thing I've been struck with, I mean, I found out after work, I don't keep my phone with me, and I saw this image, said remembering Charlie Kirk or R.I.P. Charlie Kirk or something, and then it had his birth date, birth year and death year, whatever it was, 1993 or something to 2025, R.I.P. And it's just so shocking. It's just utterly shocking, so hard to compute, to comprehend. And I admire the willingness to go into the lion's den and the willingness to sit down and have conversations with people, even if I have little quibbles about whatever his style and things like that. I think he did, something very noble. There's something very noble. That to me is America. I mean, that's the best of America. That's what's unique. That's what's good about the Bill of Rights, about the First Amendment, freedom of speech, the war of ideas. That's the best of America, and he represented that, and he died doing that. That's powerful. That's incredibly powerful. That he was shot in the throat. I heard somebody point that out. I don't know. It seems pretty symbolic to be shot. Where your voice comes from. But that is a layer of this tragedy, just to have been engaged in doing something so worthwhile, to talk to people. Now, he had major investments politically, ideologically, and so with somebody like that, you wonder how, at what point do those investments, he's has mainstream establishment politically as it gets, if you're, ardent supporter, backer of the party in power, of the president. So you've got these major commitments. And I personally wonder, I guess it's sort of cynical, how willing was he to have his opinion changed or to adjust his opinion to the facts rather than using facts and argument to reaffirm an ideological political stance. I think at some point you may be compromised, when you get to those upper levels of power and stuff. But you could see it from another angle of you get there because of your political convictions and having that inner integrity of your values, and that you can potentially be there and be aligned, be congruent, inwardly have your ethics, your individual moral ethics, morality ethics in alignment. And is anybody pure in that sense? Aren't we all compromised to some level? You get the impression that he was a pretty sincere person and had integrity with what he was saying, but I think it's also possible his commitments politically may have kept him from, anyways. Not sure where I'm going with that. But there is something that happened, the moment of his death, something that happens that sometimes in death we see somebody more clearly it's kind of a bad thing about human nature, that I've had that experience where you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And I always felt a good feeling towards Charlie. He wasn't an enemy by any means to me. Appreciated, the way he engaged with people and was curious to see, what he had to say. And that he would, engage with people from various backgrounds. That's kind of what made it interesting. I remember him doing an event with Cenk Uygur, the Young Turks, talking with Anna Kasparian, post-election, and maybe pre-election too. Just that whole time period, and even to this day, has been, and really since probably COVID and maybe before, but definitely starting around then, has been an interesting time for kind of realignments politically, things breaking open, new possibilities coming to the surface, reorientations of one's values and different alignments, things like that. And I think that was something, fertile ground. They talk about the Chinese symbol for chaos is the same one for opportunity. Kind of in all the tumult and chaos and upheaval of the election cycle and election, there's an energy there that I saw in many ways, Bobby Kennedy being one of them, but in many ways led to really unexpected and interesting, not always good, but unexpected outcomes, realignments, and possibilities. And so I found it really interesting, again, not from a particular political perspective, but just to see, and I'm being specific just because I think it's more helpful to be specific sometimes, but, a conversation like that, Charlie and Cenk, I think they did events together on stage, and just that crossover, that conversation, that coming together, to see points of resonance, points of disagreement, but to have an honest conversation that I appreciated that. It's on just kind of a cheap, superficial level. It's entertaining to watch, but there's something so healthy about that engagement, and Charlie was definitely part of that. And you see his kind of big-spiritedness, kindness. I've seen, because of his death, a lot of these kind of behind-the-scenes videos of him just being goofy and being a human being, and it's like you're always aware in the background of somebody's soul. There's like a deeper energetic resonance where you can feel, if you're sensitive, if you're not ideologically possessed, you can see the kind of goodness in somebody. And I could see that all along with Charlie, but something about his death, it's like the body, the incarnation, when that breaks open, that light that you sense is suddenly unbounded, and it kind of radiates. There's like an effulgence there in somebody's death. Again, it's kind of a sad thing that it takes that sometimes, but and even though I could see it beforehand, I just felt it even stronger that this was a really gifted human being, a good person, a good person, and that adds to the sorrow and the tragedy of something like this. It's like you see the depth of his humanity, of somebody's humanity in a situation like this. And I said that in this other video I tried. I think what I mean is also the same as you see their soul, something at a more soulful level. Anyways, and there's been comparisons with him and well, let me say something about his killer. Apparently, it sounds like, there's a human tendency to want a simple narrative, and there is something just, I can't find the right word because satisfying is kind of grotesque to use in any sense in this context, but so I'm still struggling to find the right word. But when you want almost like a caricature villain to kind of make sense of a tragedy like this, and in this case it would be, Charlie's a conservative, he's on the right, out there speaking. He definitely, I think what's clear is died for engaging with people, which is so wretched. Died for his opinions, you could say, although that, when you get into the specifics of what's emerging, the profile about the killer, it becomes a little bit murkier. Yeah, but he died doing something noble, engaging with people. You don't have to agree with his opinions, but he was out there, in the hot seat talking with people. That's a good thing. You want to encourage that kind of engagement. That adds to what's so evil and heinous about his death. But in a sense, there's something in human nature where we want a storybook caricature. You'd want this guy, in other words, to be, a radical leftist, because that would make more sense out of this tragedy. And initially, reports were coming in that made it sound like that was the case. Now, who knows what the reality is, really. We get the information we get filtered through different filters, and who knows what's actually true and what's going to emerge. And it's already kind of inverted and flipped so many times in the past couple of days. But it seems like this guy was a young guy. I've read that he was Mormon. Mormons typically, that means, politically conservative, family values. Apparently his family is Trump supporting, right-leaning, and gun owning, gun supporters, presumably the Second Amendment supporters, etc. And so that profile right there does not cleanly map up to this idea that he was a left-wing radical. I heard all kinds of stuff in between the death and before this kid was apprehended, that, the deep state assassination, this was a professional hit job, influence, Charlie started to go rogue on Israel or question things on Israel, so Israel had to take him out. All these different conspiracy theories, and it just gets really wild when in a vacuum, people just, the mind just goes wild with speculation. Trying to make sense of it and fit it into a narrative. But, as the details are emerging, it seems less and less clear, less and less straightforward. I guess the latest thing I heard, and who knows, is that the shooter lived with a transgender individual. I don't know if they were romantically linked. I mean, there's just so many details here that are kind of all over the place. The engravings on the bullet casings apparently were, even though they seemed like they might be Antifa, they might be radical left, it seems more likely from what I've read that they were part of kind of a gaming online counterculture that more closely is coded or maps onto, associates with radical right groups and people associated with somebody like Nick Fuentes or something. anyways, I don't know a whole lot about that, but it's hard to say, and then people want to take it politically and spin it for their group, and who knows, I really don't know what it is, what the reality is. I think the deeper thing here, and kind of the meta to all this, is a human spirit and a human soul. And it sounds like, to do something like that, you're a deranged person, you're a sick individual. You're sick, you're lost, you're confused, you're lost, you're sick. You don't know who you are, you don't know where you're at, you don't know what you're doing. Not that you're exempt from accountability or being held accountable for your actions. No, I'm not saying that. But to get to that point mentally, you're sick. Often it means you're ideologically possessed, but deeper than ideological possession is a sick spirit, a sick soul. That's sort of the deeper, more fundamental, you could say, substrata behind something like this. You want this perfect, again, storybook villain who's mapped everything out perfectly and has his ideological leanings, and we'll see what emerges and if we ever get clarity on who this guy is. But we can be sure that he's sick. He's lost. He's just utterly lost. And another way to say that is evil was working through this guy. Evil takes advantage of a vulnerable mind, of a sick mind. Evil steps in, and that's, when we talk about ideological possession, that's one of the forms that evil takes. So we can be sure about the spiritual confusion of this individual. And I'd say that whoever was assassinated, it's not a right or left thing. But we can be sure that he was evil, even if the sort of political narrative is murkier and more confused. I want to just finish this by, I've heard people making the comparison to other prominent political assassinations, and the 1960s comes to mind, obviously, in the U.S. And I've heard people talk about MLK and JFK are the ones that I keep hearing people bring up. And I think that is just missing the mark. And it's especially kind of striking because there is somebody in that whole era that I think is a much stronger comparison that pretty much immediately came to mind for me, and that's Bobby Kennedy Sr. I really admire and love and have been felt connected to and moved to tears at points thinking about the life of Bobby Kennedy Sr., one of the most amazing figures in American political history, in my opinion. And I think the comparisons are much closer. Of course, you can't compare eras, and in a way, it's kind of maybe it's useful in some ways to, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I don't know if Mark Twain said that or if it's apocryphal, but you hear that saying. And so you can learn from the past, but on some level, it's like you don't really need to make the comparison. But nonetheless, it did come to mind for me. Bobby Kennedy is just such a bright light. And he was somebody who was a man of the people and went out into all corners of America. I've seen video footage of him, going into the deep south, into these very poor black neighborhoods, these ramshackle, kind of third world looking houses, corrugated tin roof, scrap wood, construction type of houses in the South in the 60s, and going and hearing people's problems and connecting and talking to people. I've seen footage of him, I don't know if it was a parade or what. I think during his campaign, 68, 67, whatever it was, to be president, some event, he's going, he's in a truck bed or open car type of situation, moving through a crowd and shaking hands. And I think I'm getting this detail right. There was somebody appointed on his team just to hold on to his body while he was shaking hands, because people would, try to pull him out of the vehicle, and he's just getting mobbed by a throng of supporters. And, obviously met up with Cesar Chavez during his hunger strike, and just all these iconic moments, and that he had the common touch. He seemed blessed. He seemed like there was the light of God upon him. There was a grace, something bigger than him that he was embodying, and he was older than Charlie. I don't know how old he was. I'm thinking he was late 30s or 40s when he was killed, but a great orator, somebody who just had a light upon him, you know. I think he had just won the nomination for the Democratic primary, the Democratic National Convention. I think he had just won the primary. He was on his way. Would he have been president? I don't know. It seems likely. It seems possible from my understanding. That he touched so many people, and his murder was just in LA. I can't remember what hotel, Sirhan, allegedly. Who knows the actual truth there, why he was killed. There's another point of resonance, the whole Israel, Palestine, anyways. But the senseless murder, there's something that I've really felt with this that's come to the fore, especially when I was talking in the video I recorded before, the cheapness of an action like this. Somebody like Charlie or Bobby Kennedy or MLK, they are such warriors, for their beliefs, and so, dedicated, have given their whole lives, have worked so hard, have built something, with blood, sweat, and tears, have put so much energy and effort into doing something that they felt called to do, they felt was good. And then the utter obscenity and cheapness of somebody who has done nothing of note. I mean, maybe that's me being just. I mean, it is angering. It's infuriating how cheap it is to just get a gun and pull a trigger, and in so doing end somebody's life. The contrast of that, the cheapness of that, is infuriating. It's shocking. It's horrific. It's brutal. It's infuriating. And the incongruity of that, to how fragile our lives are, that you give everything, you're so dedicated, you're hardworking, you're a good person, you're trying to do something good in this cynical and confused and brutal, dark world in so many ways. And just the utter, again, just that word keeps coming to mind, the cheapness of it all. No effort to just sit there and pull a trigger and just end the whole thing. It's infuriating. That incongruity, that life can end like that somebody can do that. Forgive me my anger, speaking things that maybe aren't true. I mean, the shooter's a human being too. I guess he was a scholarship winner, and I shouldn't say he'd done nothing with his life, but anyways, and so there's some kind of energetic resonance or feeling I had there's something shared about Bobby Kennedy being gunned down and Charlie Kirk. I mean, superficially, and it's not even that superficial of a point, it's a pretty significant point. People point out that they both may well have been president. Charlie Kirk wasn't even eligible because of his age, to run for president, but somewhere down the line, that doesn't seem out of the question. There's a kind of common touch, a youthful brightness, big-spiritedness, a willingness to engage with people across the aisle, just that embodiment of American democracy, American values in that sense, freedom of speech, and there's just a lot of points of resonance, that I see between those two killings. I think, and just for whatever it's worth, I see those as that is the more apt comparison. Something beautiful too about Bobby Kennedy's death is that kind of highlights what I'm saying is, I had to look this up, where the train ride happened. I was thinking it was from LA all the way to DC, but I guess his body had been transported to New York. I think that's where the Kennedy family was at least in part, I don't know. But there was a train ride from New York down to DC, and it's well documented, just endless, it seems endless, just all these supporters from every walk of life that came to pay their respects as the train was going by with his coffin in it. Black, white, every walk of life, every age, nuns, which again, the Kennedy family were Catholics, so that makes sense. But every walk of life, supporters came out to pay their respects and to mourn, and just showed what a powerful impact, what a universal figure he was. And I think I got this from Bobby Kennedy Jr. He's got one of the things I find so fascinating about him is the lore that he has, the life that he's lived, and how that's given him front row seats to American history and world history. And Bobby Kennedy Jr. is a good storyteller, just because he's lived it, and he's got a certain charm and charisma, and he's a intelligent person, so he can tell a good story. But I think I got this from him, or maybe it was on a documentary I saw. I don't know. I've been through Bobby Kennedy phases where I just have watched documentary after documentary. Or I don't know how many I've seen. Maybe I've just seen one or two. But anyways, maybe I've just seen one. I don't know. Somewhere along the line, I heard that is it the Battle Hymn of the Republic? Is that the name of the song? Broke out, I don't know, at various points, or at one point would break out as Bobby Kennedy's body was passing in the train. And that's such a powerful song. If I have it right, I might have this whole thing mixed up, but mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is stamping out a vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning from his terrible swift sword. The truth is marching on. Anyways, kind of all over the place with this video, but God bless Charlie Kirk and his family. God bless this country, this world. Pour out your grace, pour out your mercy. Transform our hearts that we may be in alignment with truth, with goodness, with peace, with love, with mercy, with grace. Help us, Lord, in this valley of tears, in this valley of sorrows, confused as we all are, that we might see each other, that we might see goodness, that we might not be lost in, the machinations of evil and of energies and forces that don't have your will in mind, that are working to undermine our souls, our humanity, what's good about this world. May peace reign, may truth reign. In Jesus' name, in Jesus' mighty name, amen. May it be so, amen. Take care.